You're single, so everybody's already married. Couple. We got one. I'm going too fast. So, but about half maybe. It looked like maybe half the folks were already married, and then some folks are single. So it's kind of funny because James and I were talking, I think, in the teachers' lounge at one point in early fall, and he was talking about what he does with RCIA and instruction. And I said, I've kind of felt called at some point to maybe talk about NFP and marriage and things like that with people who were learning about the church. But the funny thing was I didn't realize that he worked with RCIA. I thought he was working with people preparing for marriage prep. So I actually prepared this whole talk today thinking that y'all were married couples who were about to get married. And I didn't realize it until I was talking to Brian right when I got in here. And I go, why did you think say RCIA? Because I know what RCIA is. I was like, am I at the right place? And then I talked to James, and we're like, well, whatever. It's going to work. Hopefully it's the same talk. But I kind of planned this very much with in mind people who were getting ready to get married. And to some degree, knowing that a lot of people are getting ready to get married, it's a time where they're kind of coming back to, or maybe their faith was really important to them, and maybe it wasn't. So I tried to cover, in my mind, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the church teaches, but then also more so talk about just kind of how living it for the 18 years of our marriage has kind of played out, and just kind of give personal testimony to that. My hope was that would maybe kind of inspire some people who are ready to begin their marriage to say, hey, let's really give the church's teaching on marriage, let's give it its the old college try. Let's give it, that sounds like it worked out okay for them. Maybe it'll work out okay for me. So that's kind of the perspective that I came from. So, I think the Holy Spirit's going to guide us for whatever reason. I'm here, you're here. Hopefully something I say has some kind of impact on you. But before we start, I did want to start with a prayer as well. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear God, thank you so much for bringing us all here this morning. We love you. You're a great, amazing, awesome God. Thank you for the gift of our faith. Thank you for these sponsors who are helping to guide these new members into our church. Please be with these candidates and catechumens. Help them to grow in their faith. Just help them to know your love and how excited you are to have them become a member of your church. We love you. Please bless everyone here today. We know we all have struggles, things on our mind. Just help us with those things and help us to get something out of this talk. Help me to be a humble instrument and just kind of speak those things that you need us to speak about. We'll put this all in your mother's hands. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Christ our King, come in the Spirit, pray for us. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So James did kind of introduce me pretty well. Thank you for that, James. I did study, I went to the University of Dallas and did study theology, and it was kind of interesting because I went there thinking that I wanted to study education and possibly be an elementary school teacher, which is kind of crazy for a giant 6'9" man to be an elementary school teacher. I took some of the classes and pretty quickly realized that's not what I wanted to do, and so I was like, well, what do I want to do? Well, I had gone to public school all my life and kind of always felt outnumbered in terms of kind of understand my faith. And so I had an interest. I went to a Catholic college wanting to learn some things about my faith, philosophy, and theology. So I was like, okay, I'll study, let's pursue some of these theology courses, and maybe I'll be a religion teacher or something like that. So I started down that track, and because my high school was all aggressive, I had tons of AP classes. I was practically a sophomore when I got there. I took some theology classes, had to declare a major, and before I knew it, I was getting my degree in theology. Now, by the end of it, I realized that I really didn't like studying theology the way Dr. Stone does. It was kind of frustrating for me, but I was like, okay, God, I'll make you a deal. I'll finish this degree if you'll give me something to do with it. And God has always kind of given me something to do with it. I've worked in Catholic education as a college admission recruiter, and then I've worked at Pinecrest Academy as the college counselor, dean of students. I was a religion teacher for 1 year, which was actually a lot of fun, but was very challenging as well. And coming up to what he said, now I'm the dean of students and I coach basketball. My wife, Michelle, we got married pretty young. I was just graduated from college and she was finishing up her senior year. We have 7 children. JT's the oldest. He's a senior at Pinecrest. Maddie's a sophomore. Hank's an 8th grader. Oscar's a 6th grader. Johnny's a third grader, Michael's in kindergarten, and Molly is in pre-K. So this year, Michelle actually got a job at Pinecrest. She's the lower school secretary. So, and then we also got a new house, which had a lot more room. So we got an exchange student named Unji, who's in 10th grade. So there's 10 of us who live at our house. And all 10 of us get up every morning and go to Pinecrest because JT's a senior and Molly's in pre-K3, which is the whole spectrum. So it's pretty neat. That's kind of how our days roll. So again, one of the things that I wanted to start off with, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this was kind of talking about the family. Sometimes I think you'll get a big somebody like myself who'll come in with a big family, 7 kids. That's a pretty big number for most people. Who'll come in and just tell you, God loves marriage. Have sex all the time and have 12 kids. And I think to some degree that might turn some people off. So I don't want to come in as somebody with a big family to say, hey, you have to have a big family. You have to have 15 kids. I know that there's a lot of different options, a lot of different callings for God, even within marriages. Some families have no children, some have 1 child. I don't think there's anything right or wrong about how that plays out. And just kind of, I want to be here to talk a little bit about what the church teaches. I feel this is just kind of a humble calling. I've kind of felt like God might call me to talk about this at some time and just kind of sharing what I've learned about marriage and sexuality through what the church teaches, but also just through living it. Like I said before, we've been married for 18 years, and I've seen a lot of benefits from living what the church teaches, and I probably didn't get them until about 3-4 years ago, is when it really started to sink in. It wasn't like I got the knowledge up front and knew it would all pan out. It's like I kind of learned it as I went, and all of a sudden I had some of these aha moments, like, oh, okay, that was really great the way that played out in my life, so I hope that we can talk a little bit about that. My format very much is to try and be relaxed. I want this to be kind of a conversation or a story, so please don't just let me ramble on. If there's something at your heart that you want to ask about or talk about, just raise your hand or ask good questions. Okay, so basically James asked us to kind of talk about 2 things. Marriage as a sacrament, and then the benefits within that sacrament of using natural family planning as a method of kind of growing your family. So marriage as a sacrament, and James, you chime in whenever I screw something up or if I miss something, or anybody else who's smarter than me, please just add in what they need to. But obviously you guys are studying your faith, so you're probably pretty knowledgeable. But we all know the church has 7 sacraments, okay? Who knows the high school student answer to what a sacrament is?
Outward sign of his faith.
No, you can't say it. Sponsors can't say it. Sponsors better know the answers. What about somebody who's not a sponsor? Anybody got it? Anyone?
A law.
What's that?
A law.
A law?
I don't know.
Good. I like that.
We actually wrote it down. I had everybody write it down when we gave the introductory, so you might have it in your notes somewhere.
I know.
She's got notes.
Good Catholic schoolgirl brain here. That's not weird.
Efficacious.
It's already over my head. It's already over my head. Big word like efficacious.
A sacrament is an efficacious sign of God's grace instituted by Jesus Christ and entrusted to the church for the sake of our salvation. That are the means by divine grace and infused into our soul.
Woo! Solid answer. So the sacraments basically are concrete signs. There's something you can see. And you guys are all prepared for sacraments, right? You're either been, how many people have not been baptized? Okay, so some are going to get baptized, and then their first communion, and then their confirmation, all like in one fell swoop, right? When does that happen? When's the big day? Easter Vigil? Everybody's on track for that? Okay, that's pretty cool. That's pretty exciting. So you're all preparing for that outward sign, that grace. So I think the question is then, why is that important? Why does that matter? And I think the thing is acknowledging how important grace is. Okay? And to me, grace is that God's love, God's help that helps us overcome the effects of original sin. Okay? So we know that once upon a time, Adam and Eve were made, and everything was perfect, and we're all happy, and God said, here's how you can live. Just don't do this one thing. Don't eat the apple, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But, we all know the story. Adam and Eve screw it up, and then original sin comes into the world. And with original sin comes that effect that now we kind of know what's right, but we tend to not want to do what's right. It's called concupiscence. Okay? Big word, big theology word, concupiscence. We kind of know where God wants us, but we're pulled in different directions, and our appetites, our desires tend to want to overpower, what our will knows is the good and the right thing to do. So God sent Christ to redeem us, and then Christ gave us these sacraments to kind of help us along the way. They give us these graces that help us to kind of be moving constantly towards Christ. So we know what the 7 sacraments are: baptism, communion, confession, confirmation, marriage, holy orders, and anointing of the sick. Okay, something that is unique about each of the sacraments is who is the minister or the instrument that brings these graces to us. Okay, so who knows what's the minister of baptism? And James, again, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, but let's see. Who would be the minister of baptism to you? To the typical person? Now,
a priest or a deacon, or in a case of an emergency, any of us.
Super thorough answer. Generally, it's a priest or a deacon, but like he said, if there was an emergency, I could knock it out for Mr. Johnson here. I wanted to make sure, he was near death and he hadn't been baptized, and he asked me, I could be that minister. Who's the minister of the Eucharist? Not tricky questions.
Priest.
Priest, very good. Who's the minister of confession?
Priest.
Priest. Who's the minister of holy orders? Oh, it's a little higher, It's a special kind of priest. Not any priest can do it. Bishop, very good. And who is the minister of confirmation? Did I say confirmation just now? I just did confirmation?
No, you
No, you
didn't.
didn't.
I did holy orders?
Right.
Holy orders, then who's confirmation?
Bishop or priest.
Bishop, or when can a priest do it?
When he's designated by the bishop.
And that's usually on Easter Vigil because they do a zillion of them.
Yeah, and at other times.
So it's kind of special designation through the bishop. Okay? And then anointing of the sick? Priest. Okay? Who is the minister of the sacrament of marriage? Spouse. Who?
Husband and wife, or the man and the woman.
Well, why wouldn't it be the priest? He's up there getting it all done. It's the one sacrament where the priest actually plays a different role. The priest is actually just a witness. The minister of the sacrament is the husband and wife. And so that's what's really kind of unique about marriage. The couple and their vows are what minister the sacrament. And it's that gift of each other. I give myself completely to you. You give yourself completely to me. And we get up in front of everybody, and the priest is a witness of the church saying that we're going to do this. Okay, but does that seal the deal? Then do you have the sacrament of marriage? If you get up in front of a church and say, I take you, I do. Is that the end of the sacrament? Yes or no? No, there's something else that has to happen. You have to go home and you have to consecrate that marriage. Okay? And the way you consummate that marriage, which consecrates it, and consummate that marriage, is where you have sexual intercourse, where you have the conjugal act, is what we call it, where the two become one. And that actually seals the marriage. The thing that I think is awesome about marriage is there's grace from the ceremony, getting married, and then there's the grace when you consummate it. Okay? When you freely give each other, are completely open in that act, that conjugal act. But like confession and communion, where you can keep going back to that well of grace, your marriage is just like that. Okay? Every Sunday, every day, you can go to Mass and receive the Eucharist and get that grace to help you overcome sin. And then you're going to go home and you're still going to struggle with something, but you're going to go back again the next day and get more grace. Anytime you feel like you've really screwed up, you go, I got to get to confession. You get out and see that priest. Okay, your marriage is actually just like that if you live it according to the way the church teaches. Every time you have relations with your spouse and you freely give yourself to them, there's more grace. There's more grace for you to be a better spouse, to be more generous, more giving, and a better parent. That's something that I think is really beautiful and really neat about marriage. Okay, so what do I have here? What is the goal of marriage? The two become one flesh. Okay? So what I kind of see is when the two become one flesh, kind of what happens is now we're responsible for each other. Like my job, in some sense, is to make sure Michelle gets to heaven. Okay? And Michelle's job is to make sure I get to heaven. That's something that we kind of take as ownership with each other. So now our strengths and our weaknesses become very complementary, okay? Where I am weak, Michelle is usually pretty strong. Where she might be weaker, hopefully I'm strong. The thing about it in living out a marriage is that's not always pleasant, okay? There can be like friction, where maybe you're a little more virtuous in something and you're trying to, where the other person isn't, you kind of can rub each other the wrong way. It can be hard for Michelle to endure my flaws. It's her patience. Her patience in my flaws is what gets her to heaven and is the example to me that helps get me to heaven. One example is Michelle is much better at sacrificing. Okay, when she's sick, stuff still gets done. You know what I mean? Kids get their lunch, laundry gets done. She just pushes through. That's not a strength that I have. Everything will kind of stop, And so that's a great example for me. And that's something I try and mimic in what she does. And that helps me to grow in that virtue of being stronger like that. I'm, on the other hand, more patient with the children. And kind of better able to listen to them. Michelle kind of gets really frustrated, put the hammer down, and then if they, she barked at them, that's their problem. They deserve to be yelled at. I'm like, well, they're people, we can go listen to them, and it's okay to apologize, and we can kind of be, humble with the children. I think we complement each other in that way. So I think, with what I said about our goal of complementing each other, helping each other get to heaven, I also think that the more we can be open and completely giving in kind of our sexual relationship and not putting artificial barriers into it, it kind of brings us closer and closer together. So what I have next is to talk a little bit about NFP and kind of how it's played out in our marriage. So NFP stands for Natural Family Planning. And it's basically what the church teaches about kind of not using artificial means to kind of control your family's growth. And I'm just going to tell the story of kind of how it evolved in our life. And then when we're kind of done with that, I'm happy to talk about questions. So Michelle and I were pretty young when we got married. I was 22, she was 21. I would say at first we probably didn't have any real plan for we were kind of just open to having kids. I was a theology student, so I had taken classes on morality and Christian marriage. So kind of the common artificial options in my mind weren't really something we considered. We weren't going to use birth control. We weren't going to use condoms, things like that. And one of the stats that I learned in one of my classes that made a huge impact on me was the percentage of the divorce rate for people who use different methods. Can anybody give me a guess? What's the divorce rate for the general population?
50%.
So one out of every two marriages is going to fail. One out of every two is going to fail, just from the get-go. That's the odds that are stacked against you when you get married. If you use NFP, anybody have any idea what the divorce rate is?
1%.
The article I found this morning was 5%. Still, 5% versus 50% chance. You have a huge chance of your marriage staying together if you use NFP. So for me, it was pretty easy. I was a cradle Catholic. I studied theology. But then when I saw that stat, I was like, okay, this is probably what we should do. It's what the church teaches, and the stats are great, so let's roll with this. That simple. So Michelle became pregnant with JT. She was finished her last year of college. JT was born. By that time, we're 23 and 22. We had to discuss how we take care of JT. Okay, we decided daycare at this point would be a huge expense anyway. So let's see if we can just have one of us stay at home. Michelle was willing to do that. And so there we are, happy family, very little money, and little baby, and moving right along. While I eagerly embraced our first child, Michelle was very nervous about the new responsibility. It was pretty funny, the very first week that we had JT home, she had made dinner, and we sat down for dinner, and in the middle of dinner, JT started crying, and she just went, "Oh, we're never going to eat a meal ever again," as a family. It's just one of those funny moments. She got the baby, And since then, she's learned that we've had meals ever since. So we're figuring out this new baby. Michelle's finishing up college. So then we started to talk about, when we might want to have another child. At this point, Michelle became very interested in learning about NFP because I come from, something I didn't say at the beginning I meant to was, I have 5 brothers and sisters. I'm one of 6. So kind of big family was just kind of natural to me, something I wanted. Michelle's an only child. And so having JT, she was nervous about taking care of him and managing everything. And then the idea of having a second child was very overwhelming to her. Like in her mind, it was not possible to have enough love for 2 kids at one time because that wasn't her experience. She had the undivided attention of both of her parents. She, as a kid, couldn't imagine like suddenly competing for love and attention and things like that. So she was nervous, and so then she became like, okay, we've got to figure out how we're going to plan this out. It wasn't just, okay, let's just do whatever now. We need to know. So we bought the NFP book, started reading and learning about things like, down in here, temperature shifts, mucus observations, fertile periods, peak days. These are all the things that you can learn when you start to study NFP. She was a scientist. She studied science in college, so she liked this process. I kind of found it as disgusting and didn't really want to know that much about it. Sure, figure this out. Okay, so we started to figure it out because she didn't want to get pregnant right away. So we had to learn how these things would work. But then, we kind of decided that we wanted JT to have, a sibling, and so we were open to about, a 2-year interval. So, she had JT, and then something that's interesting, as y'all will learn, is when a woman has a baby, shortly after she has a baby, her period and her regular fertility doesn't come back, especially if she's breastfeeding for a while. So Michelle was real nervous that we wouldn't be able to figure out, when her fertility came back, and then she'd get pregnant again, and that's how you end up with what's called, I think, Irish twins. Is where you get pregnant within those first 2 months of pregnancy. So that was something that we learned, and so then we're kind of waiting, and I'm usually typically frustrated. What are we waiting for here before things can return to normal? But we figured it out, and then her fertility returned, started to have it plotted, and then we said, okay, let's be open to having another baby, and boom, that first fertile cycle came through, and she got pregnant with Maddie. So that was, that's kind of how we came up with her. Something that we started to learn in this process of doing the charting and whatnot of following the fertility as a man, which was kind of revealing to me, is that women don't want to have sex all the time. And that they want to have sex mostly when they're fertile. And when they're not fertile, they don't necessarily want to. Now, as a man, we're fertile all the time, and so we're always ready for that. So something that started to be interesting was kind of learning how that process worked. I want to talk about that a little bit more after we continue on our little story here. So Maddie was born. Michelle kind of learned that it was possible to love 2 children. I think that's something that we learned with each child, is this kind of idea that you only have so much love. I think what you realize is when you have more than one kid, she was definitely able to, it's like your heart is really kind of, just keeps expanding. It's not like a subtraction. You only have this much love, and now this much has to go here. It's like a multiplier. You have another child, and you realize, oh, now there's more love, and you kind of share it between, those 2 children. So shortly thereafter, or maybe a couple years later, we get pregnant again with Hank. Again, Michelle's pretty nervous. I'm just like, woo, more kids. Michelle's pretty nervous because now she's going to be outnumbered. Yeah, I'm a basketball coach. We're going from playing man-to-man, now we're playing zone. Defense. So again, she's really nervous each one of these steps. How are we going to do this? There's going to be more kids than us. I would say at that point in our marriage, my attitude was still towards sex was really, looking back on it, it was still kind of about me. It was still about kind of when I wanted it and how I wanted it. I don't think I really understood, the connection necessarily between, you have intimacy and then, you could have a child. I kind of was okay with that, but she, Michelle was kind of, we have to plan this better. And I think at that point in our marriage, there was probably more times where it was kind of a point of frustration, kind of living NFP, kind of having those times where you have to say, okay, we're not going to, be intimate. I would say. So Hank was born. Oscar, number 4, came along, and he really he taught us a huge lesson about fertility. We kind of call Oscar like the miracle baby. We were going through kind of a stressful time in our life. I was switching jobs. I might have had to move out of state, and to make the move happen, I might have had to leave them behind because we just bought a house. It was kind of causing a lot of anxiety. So Oscar was conceived, and this is where I'm going to get into some details about NFP. Okay, so NFP, basically, a female's cycle is typically about 28 days, and it starts. Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong. It starts when your period starts, right? And then your period usually lasts about 6 days. Okay, then on that 6th day, usually everything ends with the menstruation, and then that's not usually a very fertile time, okay? And the way you can know that is you can study the temperature. The temperature is usually lower, and then there's not a lot of signs of mucus. Now, mucus in a woman's cervix is what basically keeps sperm alive, okay? So the more mucus there is, the more fertile it is, and the better chance you have to have babies. So right at the beginning of that cycle, you're going to have real sticky. If you have any mucus, it's called less fertile, okay? It's called less fertile mucus, and then as she gets closer to her peak day where she ovulates, the mucus becomes more slippery, it becomes more stretchy, and so you start to know, okay, you might be getting to the point of where you could conceive a baby. You hit that peak day, and usually you have to wait after the peak day. If you don't want to have a child, you have to wait 4 days after that peak day, which is usually around day 18 to 20 or something like that, and then it's a less period of time until her period starts again. So there's these pockets you can see before and after the peak day, which are the time when you're doing NFP where, okay, if you're not trying to conceive, that's where you can have your relations. Okay, so I'm always trying to push, that first cycle, day 1 through 6, out as far as possible, close to the peak day. Because I'm the man, I want to have as, much recreation as possible, and Michelle is always getting nervous. So what we learned with Oscar was there was just a tiny bit of that mucus, and I think it was like day 8 or 10, and where we had relations, and then, not till like day 16 is when she ovulates. That means between her combination of her mucus and my sperm, that guy sat in there for a long, long time before the egg came down. And we conceived Oscar. We were like, what the heck? And we went back and studied the charts, and we read the book, and it said, this can happen in 1% of cases. Wow, 1% of cases. So that's how we got Oscar. Wasn't quite planned. Great kid. If anybody knows kid, he's like a robot child. If anyone knows my son Oscar, he's probably, you can't do this, but he's a really good kid. He's a really good kid. He's just really kind. He excels at everything he does. He's a real gift to our family. And all of our kids are, but it's just kind of neat how kind of God works out. Like, we weren't necessarily planning him. This is just really an outstanding kid. But I thought that story was just kind of interesting, kind of telling us that, this is how we learned, and so hopefully maybe you can learn a little bit about this as well. So we kind of move along. At this point I think we switched jobs, and then I came to Pinecrest, and my old job had provided a car. So we were at Pinecrest now, one of my first years, and I didn't have the old job, so we only had one car. So we definitely didn't have a ton of money. We only had one car. We didn't necessarily want to have another child. So we kind of put that off. Probably our longest gap to the point was like 3 years. And then, we did okay. We bought a new car, and we're like, okay, let's try and add another baby to the mix. And that's when she got pregnant, and we had Johnny. I would say about this time, when we had Johnny, and then maybe Mike after that, is when I started to really piece together how this all really works. Because as you can tell from hopefully the talk, I've always just been, yeah, more kids, more kids, more kids. And Michelle's always been, whoa, slow down. And it was right about then when it started to be like, okay, how are we going to pay for all these people? How are we going to house all these people? And the connection started to come into my mind, like, okay, this is getting challenging. But it really made it because we were always open to life. And I struggled, I'll be honest, I struggled with, if I saw a pretty picture of a woman in a magazine, that was something, it caught my attention. I would struggle with things like that. And it started to finally make it a firm connection to me that sex was actually connected to, you had to make a conscious decision every time. Okay, do we really, this isn't about this moment where you want to feel good or have some kind of release or just be close to your wife. That every time, it's going to result, you have to be open to that life that could come from it. And it really started to teach me, I think, to be more chaste within our marriage about that time. It was really probably after kind of living it for about, the first 10 or so years of our marriage.
Can you talk about chastity in marriage and how does that fit when you said chaste? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. And that's something that I wouldn't necessarily think that you would be, like chastity's over once you get married, right? You were chaste, then you got married, now you don't have to be chaste anymore. But you still very much have to be. You have to be chaste in how you treat your wife. She's not just available to you 24/7 to fulfill your needs. You have to be chaste in how you just look at commercials and things on the internet. And so, I think sometimes in our modern culture, with the idea of artificial contraception, is chastity goes out the window, and then you can just, be intimate at any time that you want with your wife. So I think that concept is really important, that you lived a chaste marriage, and that's something that I think NFP taught me that through experience. I think I had knowledge of that, but it was probably the living of it that really taught me over time. So, we come, now we've had John, we've had Mike. We have 6 kids. We have a really small house. We're both at the point where we really don't want to have any more children. Don't really even we feel like we've been pretty generous with God with 6 kids. We have we only had a 3-bedroom house. So we had the boys in the master bedroom. We had Michelle and I in the second bedroom, and then we had Maddie had her own room. Michelle hates to be pregnant, by the way. Hates it. So this is a beautiful woman who will actually gave us all these children. She hated to be pregnant. I was like, we have no money, no more children. And then I think it was very similar to Oscar. It was one of those. Actually, no, it wasn't similar to Oscar. It was, we kind of had some stress. We were stressed about things going on in our life. I think we were stressed living in the small house. And Michelle's cycles became hard to predict. And that can happen. There's times in a woman's life where everything's just boom and you can predict it and it can be easy. There's other times where it becomes harder to predict. And it could be health, sickness, stress, or whatever starts to change the way the cycles work. And so that was something that happened to us. It became harder to predict. And then she got pregnant, and we were both like, what? How did this happen? It was probably the one time in our whole family where I think both of us were like, man, this sucks. Honestly. And it's not a happy thing, but we were like, wow, we didn't really want to have another kid. Where are we going to put this kid? How are we going to afford this? And the cool thing was if you listen to what I said JT, Maddie, Hank, Oscar, Johnny, Michael. How many girls is that? It's one girl. And Maddie, when we found out about Hank, I really hope I get a sister. Okay, no big deal.
You should see little. It wasn't until Johnny P.
Johnny P. She really wanted a sister.
6 years old.
No, found out it was a boy. Okay, I think she cried for 10 minutes. And with Michael, found out it was a boy. I think she cried for 4 hours. She was like distraught. So, we're not looking for this baby. This baby comes. I couldn't go the day they go to figure out the sex of the baby, so my mom goes and Maddie goes, and what is it? It's a girl. And you're like, okay, God, I guess I see how you work here. You know what I mean? So we had a little sister. So that was kind of a nice little consolation. So I think, but it was still stressful. And so the kind of beautiful thing about it was at that point we were really struggling. You know, Michelle didn't work. And the reason we didn't want to have Molly was we wanted to get closer to her being able to go to work. You know what I mean? We needed to get her out of the house and making some money. You know, we have kids approaching college now. But oh well, it wasn't in the cards. So we kind of pushed it. We had this tiny house. Things started to do a little bit better. I coached the basketball team and things like summer camps and things like that. You can make a lot of extra income. So, but still, money was really tight. We tried to put an addition on our house. With this 3-bedroom, two bathroom house, we tried to put an addition on it. So, man, we probably worked for 6 months. Got quotes from contractors, we had permits, we had to go through loans, and the whole process finally just fell apart because the amount of money it would take to make our house go from 3-bedroom, 2 baths to we were trying to basically make it 5 bedrooms, 2 baths was just, it made the house too expensive for the neighborhood. So we finally just said, okay, God, whatever. You want us to have a big family and live in a small house. That's what we'll do. And that was, this whole thing fell apart right before basketball season starts. And you can't get anything done in basketball season when you're a coach. So we said at the end of basketball season, we will try to just renovate our house. We were going to build like custom bunks, like in the boys' room, like a triple bunk and the bunk over here. Because we had to have 5 boys in one room, and then we were going to put nice bunks and change out all the carpet and stuff like that. Because we thought we could afford that. My parents had offered to help us do that. So the basketball season ends, and wrap everything up. And the weekend I'm set to start getting quotes to do all this work, a friend of mine says, hey, I think you should buy my dad's house. I said, why? He said, because it has 7 bedrooms. And he goes, could you afford this price? And we both laughed our heads off because he knew I couldn't afford that price. And I knew. It was kind of like a joke. And this was on a Friday. And he calls me out. He sends me a text on Sunday, and he says, hey, my dad is moving out, and he has some furniture. Do you want it? And I said, sure. We always can use furniture. We have 7 kids. And he said, I really think you should buy his house. He would take this much for it, which was about $30,000 less than the price he had quoted, which still seemed way too high for us. And so I said, well, I'll come look at a couch and we'll see. So we went over, picked up this couch, walked through it, and the house is huge. It's awesome. It has 7 bedrooms. 7. How many houses have 7 bedrooms? Not very many. So he sits there in the living room, my friend's dad, and he says, listen, he says, my son says you're a good guy and I should help you out. He said, I'm going to sell this house in 2 weeks, but I will sell it to you before that for this price, which is now $40,000 less. He drops it $10,000 sitting there in the room. And I said, okay, I don't know how this is going to swing it. You know, we have a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom house with 9 people in it. It's a wreck because 9 people live in it. How are we supposed to sell this house, buy your house, we have 1 income, and make this all work? Well, all the work that I had done kind of working on to put the addition on to our house, I contacted all these loan people. So I just called them all back and I said, you know, do you think this will work? Some people shot it down, but one lady was like, yeah, I think this might. You know, and she said, do you have a 401k? Yes, okay. Well, you can borrow from your 401k and use that for your down payment for this new house. And then that'll give you some time to sell your old house because you've moved in and you can fix it up. And I was like, okay, do you think I can qualify to have, you know, 2 loans at the same time? And she was like, well, let me see. Your credit was really good. And oh, look, your car payment is up in 6 months, which means we don't have to count that. And yeah, I think we can do this. And so I'm like, holy cow, this might work. And so I was working with this lady, and it was all on the Feast of St. Joseph, who's always been like the saint I love, patron saint of dads. Feast of St. Joseph, she's calling me, we were talking on the phone, and she's like, oh, and the market was great today, and I can lock you in at this low interest rate, and I can approve you for this. Do you want to do this? I'm like, okay. You know, and we were able to move into this house with 7 bedrooms. The lynch mob painting crew, we fixed up the whole old house, painted the exterior, got the interior all fixed up, and by September we had, you know, sold our old house and moved into this new one. Shortly after it, I got a promotion at work, which got me a raise. I told Michelle as soon as we bought the new house, I was like, "You better get yourself a job, woman," because Molly was going to school. She got the job up at school, which was perfect. It's a only when the kids go to school does she go to school, so she doesn't have to work during the summer, and so it added a nice little chunk of income to cover some of the expenses of this new house. And then because we had this big house, we said maybe we should take in. I kind of knew that some exchange students, you can make a little bit of money taking care of them. And so we had this big house, and I said, hey, should we look into this? And again, the family was like, okay, so we picked up this exchange student who kind of gave us a little bit of revenue every month. So we kind of went from being packed and having no money to suddenly having more money than we ever had in a bigger place. And kind of the reason I tell the whole story is just kind of a testimony a little bit to say, if you're generous with God, then he ends up being really generous with you. And that's kind of what we've seen in our life. You know what I mean? If you would have told me that we would be where we are and have this number of kids and actually have our money and everything work out, I don't know it would have got there. So to me, I just kind of tell the story to say it's pretty amazing. You kind of are open to what the church teaches. He can really bless it, and you can actually have a big family, and you can feed your kids and all that good stuff. So that's just kind of my testimony. I hope it's useful, helpful to you about the church's teachings. If you have any questions, fire away.
I would like to make a comment. Look, in my experience of priests, I deal a lot with couples that they want to get married. Others want to get annulments. Many. I have been priest for 19 years. I never met a couple that failed in their marriage when they both were faithful to God. Zero. So you give very interesting statistics about those who are using the natural planning. This is not that if you use this planning, you are going to your marriage is secure. No, this makes part of a commitment. So the thing is that if you commit your life with God, your marriage is safe and your person is safe. This is part, what he said, is part of the commitment. So there are several commandments. If you commit your life with all these commandments, with this way of life, your marriage is safe. I don't know if this afternoon I am going to meet the first marriage that they both were faithful to God and they split. I don't know. But so far, the statistics that I can tell you, I didn't read this in any book. This is the experience that I have personally. I know lots of people that divorced, lots. But I know zero that they were faithful to God. They were, for instance, in this matter, they were faithful. In all the other matters, they were faithful. I know zero people that failed. It is very important. If you want to commit your life with God, commit it right, He's going to take care of you. There are cases in your testimony is wonderful because you saw clearly how the hand of God was with you. In other cases, it's not so clear. You had more children than what you believe that it was necessary to have, and you didn't have the promotion, etc. And what was necessary to do? But to live it maybe with a bit more poverty. Okay, you shared among everybody the goods that you had. But if you were still faithful to God, your family is going to move forward. And you are going to still together and happy. The reason to have children, you know why God sends the children? Man was created in the image and likeness of God. With sin, we separated from God. But God wants us to be like Him. He's our Father. He loves us as children. So He wants us to have a certain resemblance with Him. He wants us to recover the likeness. You recover the likeness when you love. Why God sends the children? There is the fourth commandment saying, who knows this, the fourth commandment? Love your parents. What is the commandment that says you have to love your children? What is this commandment? There is no commandment. So it's not mandatory to love the children? It's not mandatory to love the children?
It's
Not
natural.
mandatory.
It's not mandatory. But the parents need to love the children. You see that it's in the nature. The human nature. You don't need a commandment to tell you that you have to love this child. But you could give your life for any of your children. You see why God sent the children? Because when you get the children, you empty yourself. You love them spontaneously. And you grow. And you resemble God. And you recover this likeness with God. You see? This is the reason to have the children. When somebody does not want to have the children and uses the anti-conception, etc., actually what he's saying is, I don't want to. It's not the problem. It's not in his conscience. It's just in his attitude. I don't want to have. This means that God is giving me to love. You see? Having the children, you have to love them. And you resemble God. Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, most horrific monsters in the last times, they died close to their children. Osama bin Laden died in the same compound with one of his children using an AK-47. 2 minutes before they killed Osama bin Laden, they killed the child. He wanted to have his child close. A man that probably was loving nobody else, but he was loving his child. Saddam Hussein, the same thing. They killed his both children with a missile, and very short after that, he was killed also. He had positions still in his organization. That he was a fugitive, whatever, but he still had the resistance. Okay, he had close his children. He at least he loved somebody. Man is made to love. So through this marriage this kind of marriage is something that God made for us to love. Love somebody, your spouse. You begin for your spouse, your children, and your capacity of love can be spread out. And then you are saved. You are saved. You see? When you become selfish, I don't want to have children. I just want to love this person, my spouse. Eventually, you are not going to love your spouse. You decided to be selfish. These are the candidates that you mentioned that are going to be divorced, etc., because there was no love between them. I was using the other to be happy, and the other was using me to be happy. At a certain moment, my selfish was so big that we destroyed a relationship, something that was actually destroyed from long ago. You see, that is why it's so important, this natural family planning. Because with this, you are telling God, listen, we think that we cannot more, but we are open. You send it, we take it. We believe that it's not, we should not have somebody else. Now, if God sends another kid, take it. You know why? Because you already told him. He already knows. He sends him. So there is something there. He knows. You know, you already talk to each other, you talk to God, and he sent the kid. But you don't know what is in this kid. God wants something in this kid. You don't know if probably it's the girl who is going to take care of you when you become older and sick. That's why God wanted a younger girl, because he's going to take care of you. Or you don't know if it's the priest or the governor that is going to do very good things for many people. That's why God needs this kid, you see. So if God sent him or sent her, take him. And you are going to see how you are going to be rewarded.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to go ahead.
I just wanted to say on the other side of that, I just want people to know that NFP can be used if you medically cannot have children. So, I mean, I have tumors, so Sean and I have to be really strict with NFP. So people who can't, or for medical reasons, the doctor says you shouldn't, know that NFP still works and it works great. So I'm sure that, most of the people in here are not young people, probably thinking about having more children. Know that it can still be used to prevent pregnancy if your physician says, you could die if you get pregnant, or just so people know that. And it's a beautiful thing. It does bring you closer together.
I just wanted to add a little bit, especially in Father Matthew's homily on the day of the Walk for Life, the Stand for Life. He talked about how at the end of life, he was just with a family that was going through the end of life crisis with the family, but there were so many kids there together at the end of the life. And it's like, if through abortion or contraception or whatever means of killing or stopping life, those people had not been there at the end of this woman's life, it would have been a totally different situation. She saw all of her kids there, all of her grandkids there, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful situation. I've been through that a few times myself with family members. And the only other thing I want to just add is there's a very, very, very good CD up on the kiosk up there, and if you can't afford the $3, I'll give you one. But it's called Contraception, Why Not? And it's done by Janet Smith, who's also a professor at the University of Dallas. It tells all of the medical and philosophical, mostly the medical reasons why contraception is hurting people, males and females, and I'm a witness of how it can really hurt people, and then miraculous things can happen when you.
That'll be a good follow-up on this. Janet Smith's talk from a natural law perspective. There are many perspectives we can take on this, but she gives some very good illustrations, examples, comparisons that make good sense, but also just the clear, logical, common sense that helps to explain not only the church's position, right, but the good human reasoning that makes sense, that within marriage and even outside of marriage, that there's a logic. I don't even like using the word logic here, but there's a real, that the intimacy that goes with sexuality belongs in marriage, and it is respected in a certain way, which is what Jay has been talking about here. I'd like to, any questions would be a great thing. We've got a little bit of time for that, and I'd like to open up with a little something. So you were talking about a lot your personal experience and how it helped you to understand through your experience, perhaps many years into it, the reasoning behind what the church teaches. In other words, there are these aha moments. Right? After studying theology, we have the doctrine down, we get it. But then after a while, when it's after having lived it for a while, that it really does more than just make sense. It really makes sense. Now, you understand that. What I want to ask you is, why does the church teach what it does with regard to openness to life and sex being exclusively? In other words, why not contraception? If I may.
Why not contraception?
Yeah, why not? Why does the church teach what it teaches? The church has a teaching on marriage and the family that excludes contraception, and I think you gave a great testimony, right? But a lot of people who like many people that we know, we're going to say, well, I'm going to be open to life and accept what the church teaches, and they have an understanding of it, or they may not, but they accept what the church teaches, and then as they go through experience, they begin to appreciate that more. There are others who might have an obstacle, right? And in other words, it also helps to know, why does the church teach this?
I can also say
You want
that.
to answer? Okay.
Church teaches this because we believe that God is creator. He established the rules in the creation. It's not that we can change, for instance, the gravitational law. We take to the Congress because I don't want, if I drop my coffee, I want to keep it here. So it's not that in the Congress we can change these laws.
Right.
There are laws that exist in itself. We believe that God is almighty, God is Father, God is good, God is perfect. So we have to respect what He made. It's His word, not ours. Now, in respect of marriage and respect of sexual relationships, He established that pleasure goes together as an element in the sexual relationships. Pleasure with fecundation, fertility,
Yes.
Unity of the couple, etc. When we put apart the sexual act, and I said, I just want the pleasure dimension, and not the fertility. What we are doing is that we are destroying the plan of God. This is what God did. He must be right. Now I know more than God. I can correct what he did. I can improve what God did. But this is very dangerous. So we have to respect the nature. Pope Francis shortly ago wrote an encyclical about environment. But it's the same thing. This is how we have to respect nature. Nature is this, we have to respect it, not to pollute it, not to destroy it. In the several decades ago, other popes wrote encyclicals about marriage and about sexual, the dimensions of the sexual relationships, etc. We have to keep the plan of God as He wrote it. The artificial methods are addressed to separate, to take only the pleasure. Why people don't want fertility and then want sexual relationships? Because they want the other dimension. If in the sexual relationship, instead of having a pleasure, I have a terrible headache, let's have a sex just to have a headache. No, I don't want. Nobody would like to have a headache. What's the reason? Now, the reason that God added to the sexual relationship a dimension of pleasure is that the spouses are going to feel attracted and they will procreate. But I told you, if the only thing that I am going to get from their sexual relationship is a pain, stomachache, or headache, nobody would like to have sexual relationships. You see, it is necessary to respect the plan of God as He wrote it.
Thank you very much.
I've actually been studying to be breaking up in the Word next week.
Wonderful.
And it's about prophets. This actually came to me while I was doing that. In those readings, there is something that came to mind. It specifically says that I conceived you, or I created you for a purpose before you were conceived. And that's something that really hit home when we think of contraception and form. Often we think of contraception in terms of what we personally need in life. We're not thinking about what God's plan is, what He needs us to do, or what He may need our children to do. So that's something that just kind of really hit home.
Thank you. Very good scriptural, theological approach to that. Thanks, Daddy.
I think really simply, if God is love, okay, and but the definition of love is sacrifice, right? And all we have to do is look at the cross to recognize, what He did for us, right? So the thought of the church's teaching on this being anything other than the openness to life, really, it doesn't make any sense, because as Jay, I think, did a really beautiful job of doing, he demonstrated how by being open to life and by bringing forward children that, the blessings were far in excess of what would have come otherwise. So if we think about Christ's sacrifice for us, He was love. He is love. And by giving of Himself ultimately, freely, fully, forever, all of those things, He brought about life in others. And that's really what bringing about new life is all about. I love what Father said. We've been separated by sin. Having children brings us back to the unity of peace with God. I love that. I think that's very beautiful. Beautiful.
Anybody else have anything they want to share or add?
Just one thing. When you were talking about that every kid you were concerned about how are you gonna do it financially and all that. In Mexico, we have a saying, and Father Octavio maybe know that every kid comes with a lunch, meaning every baby comes with blessings. And like you say, everything starts getting together. Somebody offered you this, you did that, and here. So I just want to comment about that.
Somebody told me that when we got pregnant with JT, because I was nervous. We were young, and they didn't say lunch. They said it's born with a bread basket under the arm.
Yes, well, people say with a lunch, in Europe, say people. Exactly.
Look, it is, that's true, but in some occasions, God does not give the lunch that we were expecting. In all the cases, God gives the lunch that we need. So it is possible that God is going to, I told you, you got a promotion. It's possible that in other cases they are going to learn to share.
That's beautiful.
They were selfish, whatever, and they didn't notice. At a certain moment, God is tightening the screws in order to help them to share more and to detach of certain
Well, I can
things.
completely attest to that because probably 5 years earlier, my whole pride was getting killed. Like these kids, I thought my oldest son was going to hate me for having to be in high school and share a room with a 3-year-old.
No.
Like my pride was annihilated, and then I finally realized after like 2 years, I was like, he doesn't care. I care more than he cares. And I was like, okay. And there's so much humility that we were talking. We couldn't keep that other house clean. Like if you came over to our house, it was a wreck because there was just too many people in one space. And so many times I had to just go, who cares? My wife's happy and my kids are happy. And so it taught me tons, and it took way longer. And only once I didn't care, then did the dynamic actually change.
But probably time for one more. Allison.
So Jay, I had a conversation with some of my senior boys who were not going to March for Life, and I asked them, well, why don't you want to go? And so we believe in choice. I said, well, tell me why. And we started this discussion about, about whether or not the baby is a child or not a child or a person. And then we got into this aspect of contraception. They had a lot of questions about it. And it got into this great dialogue. I said, well, they're bodybuilders. They're this particular group of boys. And they're like, well, do you ever believe sacrifice is important for a greater good? And they said, well, I said, because when you're building up your body, they don't need any sugar. I said, and they're like, yeah. They said, well, we choose this because it makes our body feel better now after we've given up sugar. I said, well, do you think everyone knows that? Because they haven't felt what it means to really live that without having sugar in their body. So there's a good in the sacrificing of the sugar that you're obtaining to feel better. I said, well, what if you just never knew what it felt like to really live this life that the church offers? The beauty of the gift. And I said, what if you have this beautiful girl that you fell in love with, and she was going to want to kiss you? And this is about contraception we're talking about. I said, but before you kissed her, she put a bag over her head. I said, well, now you can kiss me because I just don't want to get your germs. And I said, would you prefer that, or is that the same thing as a kiss, or if she had the bag off her head? No, it's totally different. And I said, well, it's the same thing with love. And when I made the analogy of a woman who wants to, or somebody who wants to lose weight. There's a natural way of doing it and an artificial way of doing it. One of it could be by exercise and by also watching what you eat, and you obtain the fact of losing weight. And the way that God designs food, there's a natural end, which is a pleasure. We enjoy food, and there's also nourishment that happens. So those two things are totally connected. If you take away either one, there's something distorted about it. And I said, well, so for example, if you have this one woman who wants to lose weight, or a man who wants to lose weight, and he does exercise, and he does it using his natural inclinations through exercise, and he does end up losing weight and ends up looking really good and buff. And then there's another man who decides to do it by bulimia, throwing it up. And you're like, ew, that's gross. I said, well, it might attain the same goal in a certain sense, but one's artificial, one's an unnatural way, where you're receiving the pleasure, but then you're binging and you're throwing something up. And contraception has a similar kind of connotation to it, where you're not giving yourself, you're not opening to life. You have the pleasure, but you don't have that natural outcome, which could be that you receive life. And just on the resource of forums that we all have access to, there's several good talks. One of them is called Green Sex, and that's for teenagers, but it also has a lot to do with contraception, which might be good, as well as they have a whole series on it's called The Beloved, which is another one for marriage and family as well.
Thanks, Allison. Thank you. Let's want to wrap it up with anything, Jay?
I guess the last thing that I did think of was the one big benefit that I wanted to mention was communication. I really feel like we've benefited our marriages through communication, from having to learn about this and learn about her body and understand the process. I see that as having touched so many aspects, not having to do with our sexual relationship. Because we could talk about this, and we could talk about every other important thing that we needed to in our marriage. I saw that as a real blessing. And something that I meant to point out that I thought was really beautiful is, while I said that women don't want to have sex all the time, like their fertile times are where it's more common for them. It's really beautiful how when we kind of agree that maybe God's not calling us to have children, when Michelle will make a bigger deal out of those times where she might not want to, but it's the non-fertile time. That's something that I really think was beautiful, that came from communication. Like I learned to respect, okay, we don't want to have another child, she doesn't want to be pregnant, but she kind of learned to respect, okay, I understand that you have needs, and kind of making a big deal about that. I think that was something beautiful that came out of it. So,
Thank you very much, Jay.
that's it.
All right, with that, we got. Thank you very much for coming today.